Hello, and welcome to Ethics on Call, the podcast of the Center for Theology and Ethics in Catholic Health. I'm Dan Daly.
And I'm Tom Bushlack.
And this episode is the opening keynote session of the Artificial Intelligence, Authentic Mercy, Navigating AI Ethics in Catholic Health conference that we hosted at Boston College in March of 2026. Monsignor Renzo Pegoraro, the president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, soon to be Archbishop Pegoraro as of June, delivers the keynote, which is followed by two reflections. The first reflection is by Dr. Vardit Ravitsky, the president of the Hastings Center. You probably have heard of the Hastings Center if you're listening to this podcast. Very old and venerable bioethics think tank. And Professor Phoebe Yang, a C-suite executive and industry leader in AI in healthcare. And Tom, you will remember that after this session, after Monsignor Pegoraro and Dr. Ravitsky and Professor Yang, gave their comments, and there was a great question and answer session and really phenomenal exchange between the three of them. The post-session reception was buzzing as the conference participants reflected on the insights of these three thinkers. People just came away really energized and excited, and there was an incredible energy in the room after this session.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable and a really fun way to kick off the event. And just an incredible collection of brilliant minds and compassionate hearts all in one room, kind of thinking through the challenges that AI raises for us as a species. I mean, all three of these talks get into the deep philosophical stuff that we love. For those who were not there and tuning in, just a quick overview of what to expect, and then we'll get right into it. Monsignor Pegoraro gives what I would consider a really easy to follow and concise overview with a little bit of historical perspective on how the Catholic tradition, especially the magisterium of the church, has reflected on and engaged with AI and what it means for us as a species and for work and for medicine in particular in this case. So if you're kind of new to that or you just haven't done much work in that area, it's a great introduction, but also a lot of depth in particular areas. And then Dr. Ravitsky responds, they both have really interesting perspectives, right? She's coming from the Hastings Center, which is a largely secular bioethics tradition, but she also kind of beautifully reflects on growing up in the Orthodox Jewish tradition in Israel herself and how that's informed her work. And then Professor Yang brings in that real life kind of industry experience where she has served on boards and at the C-suite level in tech industry. So you really get a great engagement and depth of different perspectives on this, while also a lot of overlap on what the core questions are and what they mean for us, as a species, but also for those of us engaged in the work of healthcare and Catholic healthcare specifically. So with that brief intro, we're just going to get right into the talk.
So again, we are delighted that Monsignor Renzo Pegoraro will deliver the conference's keynote address entitled AI in Medicine, the Challenge of Human Dignity. Monsignor Pegoraro is president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, having previously served as the Academy's chancellor since 2011. A physician and bioethicist, he provides leadership at the intersection of medicine, theology, and ethics in guiding the Church's engagement with contemporary bioethical challenges. Born in Padua, Italy, he was ordained a priest in 1989 after earning degrees in medicine and surgery, moral theology, and bioethics. Monsignor Pegoraro has held numerous academic and leadership roles, including Secretary General of the Lanza Foundation in Padua and Professor of Bioethics at the Theological Faculty of Tri Veneto. Since 2000, he has taught nursing ethics at the Bambù Gesù Pediatric Hospital in Rome and served as president of the European Association of Centers of Medical Ethics from 2010 to 2013. He is the author of numerous books, articles, and essays in bioethics, And he collaborated with our own Professor James Keenan of the Society of Jesus on the first Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church Conference in Padua, Italy in 2006. Please join me in warmly welcoming Monsignor Pegoraro to the podium.
So good afternoon. Many thanks to Professor Daniel Daly and the Center for Theology and Ethics in Catholic Health, Sister Mary Haddad, the Provost of the Boston College, and all participants of this important event, because artificial intelligence in medicine and healthcare is really an important, increasing, and running very fast topics with many ethical implications that I'll try to analyze together, but it is difficult to have a clear answer to all questions that we can see. So the summary of my presentation, artificial intelligence, a powerful force in medicine, yet accompanied by open questions. A significant contribution by the Catholic Church to frame algorithms and ethics by design. AI and medicine toward an algorithms in medicine and some Vatican documents. So the exponential growth of AI-based medical application has profoundly transformed the landscape of health and healthcare. Is transforming, but partially has already transformed the landscape. We can recognize that these developments in AI and the results achieved in the field of healthcare also express human capabilities and offer important opportunities for the health of all. So we have a kind of positive approach about that. At the same time, however, there arise profound questions about the future impact of these developments and about the role of human beings in healthcare. So the openings provided by AI medicine span a wide range of areas. Quick and accurate diagnosis, special differential diagnosis, enhanced clinical judgment, customized treatment options, reduce administrative burden on hospitals and caregivers, prediction and prevention of collateral effects, a growing role in drug discovery, and a gradual integration even in mental health. A few examples may help to better frame the issue. The digital twins, with which we test therapies and treatments in digital form. How and to what extent can they replace the real patient? What is the gap that must be bridged or safeguarded? The impact of AI on personalized medicine, where the management of large amounts of data is essential. Will it reduce costs, or will it push healthcare toward a system increasingly accessible only to the wealthy? The need to train AI in healthcare on data sets that respect human diversity, sex, age, geography, and more, in order to avoid the risk of a westernization of diagnostic tools that recognize mainly the disease of white population because they have been training primarily on Western clinical records. It already happened. There was this bias with some problem about that. And narrative medicine, in an age when machines seem capable of speaking, risk being reduced to a merely linguistic phenomenon rather than remain an encounter between persons. And also there is which kind of relationship with robots or humanoid with artificial intelligence that can offer more sophisticated support of or care in some context. There is a famous provocative perspective by Eric Topol. The medicine of the future will be personalized and democratized as patients will directly manage their treatments and make a decision about medical interventions with the help of artificial intelligence and robots. Healthcare will no longer be controlled solely by doctors and medical experts. In the future, human beings will be digitalized. Each person's genetic makeup will be known and accessible in digital form, allowing robots to provide precise and individualized care. What is this future? Is this the future? We don't know exactly which trend of the development of artificial intelligence in the healthcare. I don't know that that is the real future of medicine and care, but we need to discuss about that. So this enthusiasm, which is meant to facilitate care, healing, and the doctor-patient relationship, raise concern about the possible impact on the skills, empathy, and the responsibilities of healthcare professionals. As Pope Leo rightly affirms, the challenge, therefore, is not technological, but anthropological. Embracing the opportunities offered by digital technology and artificial intelligence with courage, determination, and discernment does not mean turning a blind eye to critical issues, complexity, and risk. Second, which kind of contribution came and is coming by the Catholic Church to framing algorithms and ethics by design? One of the first steps taken by the Holy See, particularly by the Pontifical Academy for Life, is the now widely known Rome Call for AI Ethics, which since February 2020 has gathered signatures of leaders, companies, universities. It's about 150 universities signed the Rome Call. And the fundamental principle for a sound ethical framework for AI proposed by this call are, there are 6 principles, ethical principles. Transparency, AI system must be understandable to all. Inclusion, the system must not discriminate against anyone because every human being has equal dignity. Accountability, there must always be someone who takes responsibility for what a machine does. Impartiality, AI system must not follow or create biases. Reliability, it must be reliable. Security and privacy. The system must be secure and respect the privacy of user. This call, the Rome Call, with these 6 basic ethical principles, was signed in Rome by the president of the Academy, Microsoft president, IBM vice president, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and the Minister of Italian government. In 2023, by the Chief Rabbi Eliezer Weiss of Jerusalem in Israel, and by the Sheikh Abdallah bin Bayak, head of the Abu Dhabi Forum for Peace. So there was an agreement also with this important religion about these principles. And 2 years ago in Hiroshima, it was signed by Eastern religion, representative of Eastern religions, Buddhism, Shintoism, and Hinduism. And last year there was also the signature by Cisco, Salesforce, and other companies that they agree to have this basic principle in managing artificial intelligence. So Pope Francis repeatedly stressed the need for an ethical approach towards AI to set the groundwork for algor ethics. In the message for the World Day for Peace of 2024, he asserted, "We cannot presume a priori that its development will make a beneficial contribution to the future of humanity and to peace among people. That positive outcome will only be achieved if we show ourselves capable of acting responsibly and respect such fundamental human values as inclusion, transparency, security, equity, privacy, and reliability." The same principle of the Rome Call. I urge the global community of nations to work together in order to adopt a binding international treaty that regulates the development and use of artificial intelligence in its many forms. So the goal of regulation, naturally, should not only be the prevention of harmful practice, but also the encouragement of best practice by stimulating new and creative approaches and encouraging individual or group initiative. So the position is to recognize positive aspects. It could be nice to collect best practice of using artificial intelligence in healthcare, but on the other side, which kind of problems or risk that we need to recognize and to manage. And for Pope Francis, may Christian believers, followers of various religions, and men and women of goodwill work together in harmony to embrace the opportunities and confront the challenge posed by the digital revolution, so in the way to guarantee solidarity, justice, and peace for the future. Technology is born for a purpose, and it is in its impact on human society always represent a form of order in social relations and an arrangement of power. In a more or less explicit way, this constitutive power dimension of technology always includes the world view of those who invented and developed it. This likewise applies to artificial intelligence programs. In order for them to be instruments for building up the good and the better tomorrow, they must always be aimed at the good of every human being. They must have an ethical inspiration. So it's really a challenge. What is the meaning of ethical inspiration for artificial intelligence? Not only for the use, but also for the beginning to make, to build, and to develop artificial intelligence. We can, however, find shared principles with which to address and resolve dilemmas or conflicts regarding how to live. This is why the Rome Call was born, with the term algorithmics. A series of principles are condensed into a global and pluralistic platform that is capable of finding support from culture, religions, international organizations, and major corporations, which are key players in this development. That is the address, the speech of Pope Francis at the G7 section on artificial intelligence in Italy in 2024. So it was a presentation of this ethical principle to the political leaders and representative at the G7 meeting. So why it is possible to find an agreement and in which way to elaborate an algorithms that Pope Francis used several times, the idea of an ethics of artificial intelligence. And the note, the recent note on the relationship between artificial intelligence and the human intelligence under the title Antiqua et Nova, published in January 2025 by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith and the Dicastery for Culture and Education, remind us that it is essential to emphasize the importance of moral responsibility grounded in the dignity and vocation of the human person. This guiding principle also applies to questions concerning AI. So it is very important to confirm that the human dignity and the respect of a human person are the criteria, basic criteria for the use of artificial intelligence. In this document, Antiqua et Nova, there is the list of all fields where artificial intelligence is present, more or less is everything, because it's a pervasive of all aspects of our life. And there is a specific also focus on AI and healthcare, because it is a field where artificial intelligence is more present. And the other is a military aspect, but it is another topics that we don't manage in this moment. But where artificial intelligence is improving and is becoming more and more important in this with this contribution and this power about healthcare. So, sir, about AI and medicine and healthcare. They are not the same, but I try to put all together in this perspective. So we have some positive aspect, as I told you, but of course there are also risks posed by the current paradigm of AI in medicine. And these risks include systemic opacity through black box models, the problem of transparency that is not really present. There are some experiences more transparent, but not so common. Neglect of socio-economic, cultural, political dimension of these models, adoption of a purely quantitative approach that overlooks affective, axiological, and ethical aspect, the risk of exacerbation of existing biases, discrimination, inequalities, and conflicts, further widening of the gap between peoples and nations in access to its benefits. The North and South gap is becoming more large in this approach of artificial intelligence. Massive energy consumption and ecological sustainability issues that endanger authentic human progress. The problem of the consume of energy is also a big problem, and we need to understand the sustainability of the systems for the future. Moreover, at an interpersonal level, it may engender an asymmetrical relationship between caregivers and patients. So to maintain or develop or to create a more large asymmetrical relationship through the use of artificial intelligence, lead to the de-skilling of healthcare professionals due to their unquestioning reliance on AI. The risk to lose the skill and the practice in managing not only the diagnostic issue, but also the prognostic and therapeutical approach. Threatening trust due to the overload of information available, and obscure the moral responsibility that rests solely with humans, where the question of liability in case of errors needs to be clarified. There are many discussions and options how to manage a possible error at the diagnostic or prognostic level. Who is in charge of the responsibility and in which way to define this kind of responsibility in the case of an error. So this perspective, a contribution coming from the Catholic tradition about AI and medicine, there is a joint statement by the International Federation of Association of Catholic Doctors and the Academy in a conference last November. And these principles, ethical principles, can be a way forward. Clinical oversight and judgment. AI must remain subordinated to the physician clinical reasoning. While it can assist with pattern recognition, risk stratification, and decision support, decisions regarding patient treatment and the weight of responsibility, they in trial must always remain with the human person and should never be delegated to artificial intelligence. So we need to clarify in which way artificial intelligence is a support, can help, but who is in charge of the final decision about that? Transparency and interpretability. Physicians should be able to understand and explain how AI-derived recommendations are generated. That is also the issue of which kind of sources, literature. So if there is a clear documentation of the documents, of the articles, of the sources that artificial intelligence use for this kind of recommendation. There are some examples that they clarify the sources of the position by the artificial intelligence. Because black box algorithms that lack interpretability risk undermining trust and clinical accountability, including inducing the skilling and delegation of responsibility. Of course, there is a kind of pressure coming from AI and to follow some advice or some recommendation, some interpretation, because it is becoming more and more perfect, and there is a trust in the artificial intelligence that is becoming more and more relevant. So in which way, as a doctor and nurse, maintain a kind of autonomy and the possibility to analyze the suggestion, the indication, and to have a critical approach to the recommendation by the artificial intelligence. Bias awareness and equity. AI system trained on incomplete or biased data sets can perpetuate disparities in care as in other aspects of life. Clinicians must be vigilant in recognizing this risk and advocate for inclusive, representative data in AI development. But you have to know which kind of data were used, in which way they were combined in the algorithms, and if you are able to understand in which way the conclusion by the artificial intelligence are elaborated. Data privacy and patient consent. The use of patient data in AI application must comply with legal and ethical standards. patients should be aware that making available their data may be a form of participation in the common good and improving medical knowledge and practice. But this should be an expression of free responsibility and managing in a very safe way. The issue of privacy and in which way the data are protected when they are involved in this process. Responsibility and liability, errors could be expression of a failure of programming, supervision, clinician action, or of the algorithm. Therefore, it would be important to differentiate when the error, the medical error, can be traced back to the doctor for the improper use of these systems, or when it is only and exclusively attributable to the hospital that manage and sets the instrument. When the hospital buys a system, which kind of information, which kind of guarantee about the use and of these systems, or about the AI company. The physician has also the responsibility to warn his or her patient of the dangers to use generative AI as psychological advisors and to help him or her to escape the trap of confinement in numerical bubbles. Access and fairness. AI should not widen the gap between resource-rich and resource-poor settings. As stewards of patient care, physicians have a critical role in shaping how AI is adopted to ensure that AI strengthens, not compromise, the integrity of medical practice. So these principles needed to be incorporated into the world of AI, following the principle of ethics by design, so ethics inside the system and the elaboration of the system. That emphasize the role of makers in ensuring human agency is expanded and respected through AI. As declared by Antiqua et Nova, the commitment to ensuring that AI always supports and promotes the supreme value of the dignity of every human being and the fullness of the human vocation serves as a criterion of discernment for developers, owners, operators, and regulators of AI, as well as to its user. So all we call stakeholders, all people involved in artificial intelligence could be participate in this perspective of ethics by design and the proposal of an algorithmics specific in this context for healthcare and medicine, not a general criteria, but more focused criteria for healthcare. So the fundamental challenge is to reclaim that human factor that seemed to have been lost in the blind belief of technological progress and to rejuvenate the human being in his or her dignity, founded on corporeity, consciousness, body-spirit unit, unique ontological identity, relationality, freedom and responsibility, moral conscience and sensibility towards one's inherent individual and social vulnerability, to be guided by values like justice, solidarity, and common good. And so that is also Pope Leo recently. Technological device must never detract from the personal relationship between patients and healthcare providers. Indeed, if AI is to serve human dignity, and effective provision of healthcare, we must ensure that it truly enhances both interpersonal relationships and the care provided. Given the vast economic interest often at stake in the fields of medicine and technology, and the subsequent fight for control, it is essential to promote a broad collaboration among all those working in healthcare and politics that extends well beyond national borders. It is more an international challenge, not only local, to work together to define in which way the artificial intelligence can support the relationship and to guarantee the respect of all human beings involved. So the numerical techniques based on computations, as effective they may be, have many epistemological and logical limits. Therefore, they cannot replace all the facets of a human thought and all the dimensions of human relations. AI cannot lead to forget that medicine is not only a science or a technique, but a human way to support the patient in his or her suffering, even when any technology is useless. The major risk of AI success in medicine could well to be insidious way to suggest progressively that medicine is only a technique to cure and not a deep human relation of care. The patient is not a problem to be solved by AI or other technologies. She is a mystery revealing the Christ himself. So it's not possible to reduce the person only to a technological problem. The person is still a mystery, and it is not sufficient to have many data to quantify all the aspects of the human being, but we need to remember that medicine and care is take care of a human being. It's not only a problem of technical solution. So I conclude toward an algorithmics in medicine. It is important to reaffirm the centrality of the human person in his or her intrinsic dignity. A human-centric AI. That was discussed also 2 years ago at the G7 meeting, how to affirm and to confirm a human-centric AI. That is also the European approach with the regulation that they have about artificial intelligence. So, and it is important by our approach and our contribution to put the human being at the center of AI. Of course, all the human persons are equal and of irreducible uniqueness. The human person in his her physical, corporeity, psychological, and spiritual integrity. So human being is not only a body, but we need to reaffirm the importance of the body. We can discuss about that because artificial intelligence is without a body. It's only we call intelligence. It's not a real intelligence. Okay, now we need to specify what is artificial intelligence. And the risk that to treat the person without the body and also concentrate to the idea of the mind or to avoid the concrete experience of the human person and the integrity of a human person. Relationality, the relationships between persons expressed and actualized in various contexts. And the importance of compassion, professionalism for doctors and nurses, justice, solidarity, subsidiarity, and sustainability are all criteria that we need to include and to develop about algorithms in healthcare and medicine. And there is a particular focus on the methodology and the perspective for these algorithms. So in which way to work with a very broad cooperation of different perspectives and disciplines to propose an algorithms for healthcare. Of course, the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach, dialogue with the companies of AI. We needed to find a table where we can discuss with the companies about the development and the use of artificial intelligence. The healthcare professional and the patients organization to be more active in the process, not too much passive and to receive the artificial intelligence as something that we are not able to prevent, to elaborate, to develop with ethics by design inside the perspective. Scientists, political leaders, social science, ethicists, theologians, you can see that is a very broad approach and dialogue, but we need all these disciplines in dialogue to define what is algorithms. So the challenge, the question is from the basic principles, the wrong call for AI ethics and other principles, how to translate into the concrete clinical setting and an administrative setting, how to translate into norms, ethical norms, not immediately the legal norms, because it's very difficult for the legislation to follow the development so fast of artificial intelligence. European Union has established 2 years ago a general regulation for AI in Europe, but it's more focused on the data, the privacy, the consent, the security, and so on, with some implication in the field of healthcare. But there is a tension between the European Union and the big companies, Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, and so on, because they don't accept this kind of law, this kind of regulation. So in which way to manage this kind of tension? And it will be a tension. We need to accept a tension. But it is important to be present and inside the tension, not outside, in the loop, not outside the question. So participation of all the stakeholders at the different levels, particularly physicians, nurses, patient association of patients, association, network of hospital, and so to be present, I repeat, to be more active in this process. Education of physicians, transparency, equitable access, and literacy. We needed to inform all level of stakeholders what is artificial intelligence, what is the meaning of a proposal or diagnosis or recommendation coming from artificial intelligence. So to know better the concept, the words that we use in the field of artificial intelligence. Because also if we want to inform the patient that we are using artificial intelligence for the diagnosis or for the therapies, which kind of information to give to the patient, which kind of trust in this recommendation, and which kind of responsibility, as I already presented, when there is a mistake or error Who is in charge of the error about that? The machine, the doctor, or the hospital that bought that system without the guarantee that is working? And of course, there is now an interesting development about which kind of insurance to cover the damage by the mistake of the artificial intelligence. There are some experiences where there is insurance specific, as we have for the clinical trials, there is a specific insurance for the trial, for the damage of the trial. So what is the specific insurance for the patient and the doctor when you use artificial intelligence in some context? It is important, so education of physicians, nurses, healthcare managers in understanding, using, and communicating information about AI in healthcare. We need an important education about that, starting from the undergraduate student or during the graduation. What is artificial intelligence and which kind of responsibility? And now there is a proposal, a project of an ethical code for AI in healthcare. So the issue of the translation from the principle to more concrete, specific norms, an ethical code, because I repeated, the legal aspects are more complicated and difficult to manage. But it's possible to find a consensus at the international level, as we have for the World Medical Association professional code or other medical code that we have at international level. Last year, there was the new version of the Declaration of Helsinki for the ethical aspect in human research and trials. And so it's possible to have a ethical code in healthcare, so we can have a more clear and concrete norms that can help everybody in this setting, because this code could help in the three specific area of healthcare: clinic and the clinical setting. That is important. Second, research. Now we have trials also prepared by artificial intelligence and managed by the artificial intelligence. So we need to define how to have criteria for that. And of course, administration, the issue of resources, justice, priorities, how to use artificial intelligence. Because if you have to plan, to define priorities and to the use of resources, in which way you maintain and you offer criteria of justice, solidarity, and access to everybody. And I think as a Catholic Church and the Catholic organization, association, we are able to offer good ethical reflection and criteria for our association, organization, but for all healthcare that is challenging this new important technology. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Monsignor Pegoraro, for that excellent talk. You really helped us to begin the conference on an incredible foot here. You remind us that the patient is a mystery, not a problem to be solved, and that our fundamental challenge is to revive, as you noted, the human factor in evaluating AI. And to do so in a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. None of us can figure this out on our own. We only can do this together, bringing all these different kinds of thinkers together to do this, which is what we're doing these 2 days. So thank you. So now we turn to two reflections by leaders in AI. The first reflection is from Dr. Vardit Ravitsky, a leader in the ethics of AI in healthcare. Dr. Ravitsky is president and CEO of the Hastings Center, incredibly prominent research center in the bioethical and healthcare space. It's an independent, nonpartisan bioethics research institute. Dr. Ravitsky is a senior lecturer on global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School. Her research focuses on the ethics of genomics and reproduction, as well as the ethics and governance of health AI. Let's welcome Dr. Ravitsky.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be able to reflect on the wise, responsible, and inspiring words of Monsignor Pegoraro. Nice to see you again. And I would like to start by congratulating Boston College for hosting this event, because I think the challenges that AI presents are existential in nature. They're not just instrumental, they're not just pragmatic. And when we face, as a humanity, such level of challenge, we must engage in cross-cultural exchange, in that kind of dialogue that the Rome Call really exemplifies. I grew up in Jerusalem in the Jewish Orthodox community. My husband is Irish, a Dubliner, who was an altar boy for 7 years. And so cross-cultural exchange for us is just another Tuesday. And I'm very comfortable engaging in this dialogue. So I want to use 3 examples of recent work that I have been engaged in, some of it at the national level, to illustrate where I see similarities, convergence, meeting points between the visions, the secular vision, and maybe overall the religious vision, and where I see some interesting differences that call for conversation. I'll say a word about the Hastings Center for Bioethics that I'm so honored to lead, because it's considered the birthplace of the field of bioethics in the 60s in the wake of the atrocities of the Second World War, where bioethics emerged in response to ethical challenges. And while in its origins, a lot of theologians were involved in shaping the fields and creating the sort of framework for its thinking, it pretty quickly emerged as a secular enterprise, to the point that today we're seeing some debates about whether religious voices even have a place in bioethics. And with some colleagues, a year ago, I published a paper that we titled Why Bioethics Should Welcome Religion. So the pendulum went all the way, and today really the sort of fundamental assumptions of bioethics are based on individual autonomy, human rights, and we were calling for more inclusion of religious perspectives in this field. But it is a mostly secular field, and my first set of comments are coming from that direction, because over the past 2 years, I was a member of the steering committee that led an initiative of the National Academy of Medicine, a very prominent professional body in this country, to create a code of conduct for AI in healthcare for the United States, less ambitious than the global initiative you were describing. And we finished this work. It was published and launched a few months ago. And I invite everybody who's interested to just look up on Google AI Code of Conduct, National Academy of Medicine. The publication comes up. A webinar that we gave on it comes up. And what I found fascinating when I read the assumptions, the framework for the Rome Call, is the synergy and the convergence. So if you look at the code of conduct that we developed with the National Academy of Medicine, which was, by the way, a beautiful example of cross-disciplinary effort, because that steering committee around the table, we had CEOs of healthcare systems, we had AI developers, Google and Microsoft were at the table, we had lawyers, we had community and patient representatives, we had ethicists. So it was, when we talk about being inclusive and hearing multiple voices and finding a table, that was such a table. And therefore, I think the outcome is very impressive. But if you look at the framework that we came up with, The first commitment, we call them commitment, they're really ethical principles. The first commitment of the document is advance humanity. So I think the importance of humanity and dignity leads the thinking about the ethics of AI in health without a theological commitment. This was a completely secular initiative effort, and the first commitment is advance humanity. The second is ensure equity, totally in line with the impartiality core principle of the Rome Call. The third is engage impacted individuals, which to me is another way of saying inclusion. So when I look at the top commitments that we identified, they perfectly align with a call, a document that was developed with leaders of faith traditions. And I think that speaks to the fact that often in bioethics, we see an interesting phenomenon where we may disagree on where we come from. We may disagree even on the ethical theories that guide us, utilitarians, Kantians. We may come from a deontological place or a virtue ethics. We can argue for many days about our theoretical commitments, but we can quite easily agree on the principles that should lead our conduct, our behavior. We've seen this over and over again, even in the Belmont report that frames research ethics. There were multiple voices around the table. They couldn't come to a theoretical agreement, but they could identify principles that they agreed on. So to me, that's an interesting way forward that would bridge the divide, not just between religious voices and the secular ethos of bioethics, but across religion and faith traditions as well. So that's one insight that I wanted to share that was interesting to me. Two other examples of projects that I was recently involved in that I'm putting out there just to kind of stimulate our reflection, also in preparation for tomorrow's discussions. Growing up as getting an orthodox education as a girl, one concept that led so much of our thinking in the community was the concept of being created in the image of God. And I always was taught and felt that so many of our moral commitments come from there, that concept of image calls upon us to behave in certain ways, to respect certain values. Now operating in a mostly secular space, I often ask myself, when that is taken away as a foundation, what is the reason? What is the why? Where does the guidance come from? And of course, there are multiple answers, human rights frameworks, personal autonomy, agency. Of course, it's not that philosophy has not generated answers to this question. But the reason I'm putting this forward is that AI specifically raises in a novel and unprecedented way the question of what makes us human. And if we can't fall back on humans are in the image of God, how do we cope with these challenges that AI presents? And I'll give examples. When you face a machine that can perform personhood, we called it in a recent paper, that makes you feel that it's thinking, it speaks to you, it gives you the impression that it cares for you, that it's compassionate, and it's able to express empathy. Those are all characteristics, traits that for centuries we absolutely believed only humans can express. And that is the existential challenge that I feel now every day. So several months ago, I was a part of a group of researchers that wanted to test what I just said by the use of a chatbot that provides medical advice to patients. We surveyed thousands of patients, and we divided them into two groups. Half of our participants had an exchange with a human clinician and the other with a chatbot. And they were able to express their medical concerns, get advice. And then we asked them for their level of satisfaction from this interaction. And there was a statistically significant difference in favor of the chatbot. Patients felt more heard, they felt more compassion, more empathy when they talked, exchanged with the chatbot, but they didn't know that they were not conversing with a human. It's easy to explain. The chatbot was never tired, it wasn't impatient, it didn't have to move on to the next patient. It could say things like, "Oh, Mrs. Jones, this must be so difficult. You must be so tired," etc. It had it had endless resources and patience and time. But then we told them the truth about their exchange, and the level of satisfaction of those who conversed with chatbots dropped dramatically. And so that posed for us an ethical question. If empirically we feel more supported and we can experience empathy and compassion when we speak to machines, but we don't want to know that we are, is the way forward to mislead patients, to actually lie to them, or to just hide the facts from them? And now, if you're thinking from a utilitarian perspective and the only thing you care about is the level of satisfaction, there's one answer. But our conclusion of the paper was that that's where ethics comes in. And people's autonomy, people's agency, trust, truth-telling, transparency, so many of the concepts that we just heard about must be the deciding factor at the expense of preferences or level of satisfaction. Is that because there's a longer term view here? Is that because systemic considerations matter? Is that because there are ethical principles that should override? Many answers are possible, but the reason I shared this with you, other than the fact that it's really interesting, is that this calls into question what we even mean by empathy. There are now philosophical publications on the following question. Is empathy there when I'm feeling it, or does it have to be also expressed on the other side, felt by the being, the entity that provides, that is the source of the empathy? Because a chatbot does not feel empathy. It can perform it. It can make us feel support in a certain way. So I am wondering whether coming from a faith tradition versus secular bioethical frameworks would provide different answers to questions such as, what is empathy in the age of the ability to be performative about it? So that's what I mean. I just wanted to illustrate what I meant by existential question, because things like thought, speech, compassion are now really being challenged. And I'll end with my last example, and that is a paper that we are actually just submitting for publication, and it will be hopefully published in a place that will call for commentary. The American Journal of Publication, when you publish a paper, the whole community is invited to respond to it. So I hope many people in this room will be stimulated and will want to respond. And that is a paper that we called, "Are Humans Morally Special?" And that is another dimension of this existential challenge that AI poses. If AI can perform ethical thinking, is it really a part of the moral community? The question that we pose in the paper is this: generative AI, I'm not touching now on diagnostic and ambient recordings and administrative, generative AI, such as the chatbots that I just described that just help patients get information. Chatbots used in mental health to replace therapists that we know were suffering globally from a terrible shortage of mental health professionals. And chatbots are now taking the place of those professionals. And care robots, especially in aging societies where caregiving responsibilities fall on family members, have a profound impact on our economy. Most industrialized societies are now characterized as aging societies, and the issue of loneliness and caregiving later in life is a major concern for healthcare. as I'm sure you're coping with. The notion of that, some of that care being provided by robots that can talk to people, that can use facial recognition and sensors in the home to understand mood and needs and to interact and to provide care that there is no human there to provide. There are many companies that are getting into this space now. These are all uses of generative AI that for many people are ethically troubling, challenging, to the point that maybe regulation should create barriers to these uses, or at least integrate design principles so that those generative AI algorithms are used in certain ways and not in others. So our paper asks, in what ways should we guide the development of those chatbots, care robots, in light of the notion that humans are morally special? And what does that mean? So we look at 4 candidates for what makes humans morally special, and I conclude with that. The first is species membership, but we very quickly conclude that that's not a strong argument. The second is embodiment, which you talked about. But that raises another question, when the robots become quite embodied, how do we distinguish ourselves? The third is personhood. That opens many philosophical boxes, but we're also concluding that that's not strong enough because of this notion of performing personhood that generative AI can engage in. And the fourth one is the one that we're going to go with, and I'll leave you with that. The fourth characteristic element that make humans morally special is membership in a moral community. And what we mean by that is that even if generative AI can tell you moral principles, or even if you can present a dilemma and get a good answer to what you should do, I tried that, it works very well, it's scary. Even if it can do those things, it's not a member of the moral community in the sense that it cannot create moral frameworks with us. It doesn't have the stakes that we have when we, as a human society, develop, refine, revise our moral norms. And therefore, since it cannot be a part of the community, it should not be allowed to take on certain roles and be granted certain privileges and responsibilities. And that's where we draw the line around the design of those types of AI. So I just wanted to flood with some real-world examples of current implementation and current challenges that we see in the field, and invite us to constantly reflect on how we address those challenges when we come from the humans were created in the image of God framework, and when we come from other secular, philosophical, moral frameworks that I think leave us very vulnerable in this era of generative AI that comes so close to human. Thank you very much.
While I, Phoebe Young, have held, currently hold, and in the future will hold a number of affiliations across academia, private sector, and nonprofit entities, the perspectives shared in the following remarks are mine alone and do not represent the positions or views of any entities with which I have been, am, or in the future may be affiliated.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ravitsky, for that thought-provoking response to the Monsignor's address. You raised the possibility of consensus across difference regarding norms, and also raised these anthropological and existential questions about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be created in God's image, or to belong to the human community. Is there overlap there? How do we come to some kind of maybe agreement or functional agreement, as you noted earlier? So thank you very much. So our final speaker of this session is Professor Phoebe Yang. Professor Yang is an experienced former C-suite senior executive across 4 public companies, appointee in 2 presidential administrations, and is a Fortune 250 and S&P 500 board director. She brings extensive expertise and experience in technology, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital transformation in some of the world's most valued and admired companies across media, technology, and healthcare. She is currently a lecturer on the Stanford Law faculty and serves on the boards of GE Healthcare, Doximity, and CommonSpirit Health, where she is chair of the Technology Committee. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yang.
Good afternoon. It's a treat to be here, and it's wonderful to see so many old friends, and I'm looking forward to meeting many others. This is a really exciting time in the history of humanity, as well as in the history of technology. And thank you, Dr. Daly and Sister Mary, for convening us around these important issues. Catholic healthcare has a very unique role in speaking into these issues. And Monsignor Pegoraro, thank you for your leadership and your courage and your wisdom around these questions. We very much need your voice and your guidance in this. As Dan has mentioned, my perspective is as a practitioner. I am one of many millions involved in the technology industry and in the business of AI. In addition to the companies that Dan mentioned, I've just completed teaching a new course at Stanford around the business leadership question in AI, and I've had guest speakers from many of the companies that Monsignor mentioned have signed the Rome Call just coincidentally. And so we've had some really robust conversation around AI and the future of AI and agentics and identity. And I've served as the head executive at a large technology company, Fortune 2 company, running the healthcare business. So I've had to wrestle with a lot of these questions. Monsignor has very thoughtfully offered us some very pointed cautions about technology. And as he has said, Pope Leo, quoting Pope Leo, this is really an anthropological claim. The question is less about technology. It's really around our anthropology. And Dr. Ravitsky mentioned this as well. You know, what does it really mean to be human? The technology industry tends to see this question as a technical question. And so naturally, those in the technology industry where I have been see technical fixes, whether it's having a better algorithm to address bias, having guardrails to improve safety, RAG to reduce hallucinations, tighter safety benchmarks. And those are really important mechanisms. But what Monsignor has pointed us to is a more essential question. It's the question of who we are, and I would add who we want to be. We are in an age when people are forming therapeutic and even romantically dependent relationships with AI agents, such that AI agents have been able to convince humans to fatally harm themselves and others. We're in an age when the boundaries of AI agency are showing signs of what some researchers suggest resemble consciousness. Just 2 weeks ago, a Cambridge philosophy professor was astounded when an unknown AI agent, sua sponte, emailed him suggesting that his research, quote, raised questions I actually face, not just as an academic matter, close quote. All this raises that fundamental question, what does it mean to be human? And there's perhaps no realm of human endeavor where this question cuts deeper, reaches farther, or has greater consequence than in the field of medicine. So I'd like to describe and respond to 3 areas of Monsignor Pegoraro's keynote that hopefully elicit some, provoke some thought. One is where the industry genuinely converges with these concerns. 2 is where it falls short. And 3 is where the tension between these perspectives is itself productive. First, where the AI industry aligns with Monsignor's comments is in the broad need for AI ethics principles. The 6 Rome Call principles, transparency, inclusion, accountability, impartiality, reliability, and security and privacy, are not foreign to the serious end of the AI industry. They reflect key elements in the frameworks already adopted by leading AI labs and medical AI companies. For example, the AI industry employs techniques such as red teaming to improve reliability and security and privacy, bias audits in medical data sets to promote impartiality and inclusion, and model cards to ensure transparency. The concern is not a distant prospect, though. AI is already widely embedded in the practice of medicine. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has already authorized 1,430 AI-enabled medical devices, over that number actually, and 1/4 of those were cleared in 2025 alone. More than 80% of American physicians and over 75% of hospitals report using AI in clinical practice. But commitments on principle have practical limits. Monsignor Pegoraro rightly calls for ethics by design. The industry has moved in this direction, but unevenly and incompletely. Commercial pressure drives an intensity and philosophy in AI development and deployment that works against careful ethical deliberation. Frameworks like the NIST AI framework and the Coalition for Health AI, whom we'll hear tomorrow, have broad buy-in across sectors, but their weakness lies in their voluntary nature, which can be abandoned by any actor under competitive pressure. Where the industry falls short, Monsignor raises many worthwhile points, but in the interest of time, I want to address 4 of those more pointed cautions where I believe industry can and should do better. First, Monsignor rightly identifies the black box problem as a core risk in medical AI. The industry is aware of and working on this. Interpreting and explaining how AI thinks is among the most active research areas. Candidly, though, the most powerful models are often the most opaque and the least interpretable. And the trade-off between making bigger, better models versus tolerating less transparency can have dire results, especially in medicine, where a wrong answer can mean a wrong diagnosis and have fatal consequences. Second, perhaps the most widely discussed challenge with frontier models, or large language models, is tendency to hallucinate, which undermines Rome's call for the reliability principle. Recent research by Georgia Tech and OpenAI shows that language models hallucinate because their post-training actively rewards guessing over admitting uncertainty. This is not unlike a student who takes a multiple choice exam and is rewarded for guessing. Guessing gives you a shot at a right answer, but writing nothing guarantees 0. AI models have been trained in this way to making up an answer scores higher than saying, I don't know. For arbitrary facts, researchers have shown this makes hallucinations mathematically unavoidable. Here, I would diverge from common AI industry practice to suggest that this is unacceptable. AI leaders have it within their capability to revise this approach to systemically reduce hallucinations, particularly in high-stakes fields like medicine. We should enable models to answer, I don't know, and stop penalizing such answers as if incorrect. This alone would go a long way to increasing the reliability of models. Third, Monsignor Pegoraro appropriately warns that AI tends to exacerbate bias, inequities, and conflicts, and widens gaps between peoples and nations. Training data reflects existing healthcare systems, which already underserve the global south and marginalized populations within wealthy countries. A landmark study found that a widely used clinical algorithm required Black patients to be considerably sicker than white patients before recommending the same level of care, because the algorithm was trained on healthcare spending data, reflecting long-standing wealth disparities. And the global picture is as stark. The U.S. benefited from over $11 billion in AI healthcare revenue in 2023, 15 times what India did, 800 times that of South Africa. If medical AI is trained overwhelmingly on data from wealthy countries, it will perform best on populations that already have the best care. This is a structural problem, not merely a technical one, and the industry cannot solve it alone. This is why the notion of algor ethics across sectors is so very important. Fourth, Antiqua et Nova explicitly warns that AI can de-skill workers, subject them to automated surveillance, and relegate them to rigid and repetitive tasks. Monsignor has pointed this out to us. This may be his most important warning for the industry. The risk that clinicians become passive consumers of algorithmic output, losing judgment, clinical experience, empathy, and clinical intuition is real. More than 3/4 of physicians believe AI improves their ability to care for patients. Yet the Yale School of Medicine researchers studying ambient AI scribes have already flagged the caution they call cognitive atrophy or de-skilling, where medical school students fail to learn how to clinically reason, prioritize, and document findings because the technology performs it for them. The industry's language of clinical decision support assumes the human remains central, but the gravitational pull of efficiency points towards automation. I serve on the board of a digital company that is used by over 80% of U.S. physicians. This company enlists over 10,000 physicians across every specialty area to review every clinical answer and every piece of content produced by its Gen AI solution before making it available to its physician user base. Humans are at the beginning of the loop, ensuring quality inputs. Humans are at the end of the loop, ensuring reliable, unbiased outputs. This is authentic ethics by design. And if I may be so bold, I suggest this is how the broader industry should be operating and how best to preserve caregiver skills and relationships. Finally, the heart of Monsignor Pegораro's address is summed up in Pope Leo's admonition. As he said, the patient is not a problem to be solved by AI or other technologies. He or she is a mystery revealing the Christ himself. This is where the industry and the Catholic anthropological perspective are most productively in tension. AI is by its nature an optimization technology. It excels at pattern recognition, prediction, classification, treating inputs as problems with solutions. Medicine as care, as Monsignor has described it, even when medicine cannot cure, includes dimensions that resist optimization: presence, compassion, relationship in suffering, trust, the willingness to simply be with one who is not merely a patient defined by his or her illness, but a person created in the image of God. This is the realm of relational intelligence. And here, technology has very little, if anything, to offer. The honest response by industry is not to claim AI can replicate these things. It cannot. Rather, the AI industry's claim, at least today, is that when properly developed and deployed, AI can free clinicians to engage more meaningfully with persons in their care. When the Permanente Medical Group deployed ambient AI scribes across 2.5 million patient encounters, 84% of physicians reported improved communication with their patients, and 47% of patients said their doctor spent less time looking at their computer. One doctor even reported, "AI saved my marriage." But the rhetoric of freeing up time for human connection must not be a cover for the economic motive to increase profits to benefit a few at the cost to many. Pope Leo's warnings about the vast economic interests often at stake in the fields of medicine and technology are well placed. I've lived them. Boards and executive leadership teams should regularly measure whether the AI they are using, developing, deploying is actually resulting in better care, more fulfilled teams, healthier communities. Before I close, I want to say a word about moral agency, liability, and the limits of our frameworks. Antiqua et Nova states, the commitment to ensuring that AI always supports and promotes the supreme value of the dignity of every human being serves as a criterion of discernment for developers, owners, operators, and regulators. Only humans are moral agents. The industry agrees with this in principle. But as Monsignor has mentioned, the liability question is unresolved. How financial firms see the question of who holds the risk of failure can be one proxy for how we think about it, but I would suggest it's not the only factor. If an AI system contributes to a misdiagnosis, who does bear that responsibility? The developer who trained the model, the hospital that deployed it, the physician who relied upon it and used it, the regulator who cleared it. Candidly, there is a real tension, and the church asks, what does this do to the humanity, the dignity of the human person? The industry asks, what is the scale of harm this causes? These are very different questions that arrive at different places. Yet disagreement on foundations can coexist with agreement on action. Indeed, the Rome Call embodies this, bringing together Catholic, Jewish, and Muslim leaders, technology corporations, international organizations, and around a shared ethical floor, despite profoundly different starting points. In closing, Monsignor's keynote calls for dialogue amongst AI companies, clinicians, patients, ethicists, theologians, and others, both religious and secular. The Holy See brings what few other institutions can, a unique global perspective, a rich intellectual history of advancing science and technology from Galileo to Gutenberg, Pasteur to Pascal, while honoring the person, humanities, culture. And importantly, it brings no commercial stake to the outcome. Ensuring medicine remains a deep human relation of care and not merely a technique to cure is a worthy shared commitment, even across philosophical differences. All humans of conscience can embrace the notion that those in healthcare, clinical and non-clinical, are, as Pope John Paul II said, guardians and servants of human life. I'm immensely grateful for the challenges the Pontifical Academy for Life has offered to the AI industry, and to the Center for Theology and Ethics in Catholic Health for bringing us together around these questions, and to Boston College, this wonderful Jesuit institution. My son is a student at a Jesuit high school right now, so I hope he's learning some of these things. These are exactly the challenges we must ponder, act upon, and embrace. May those of us in industry prove worthy in our responses to the persons and communities we are all called to serve. Thank you.
Wow, Dan, I know that we were both there, but it's really incredible to re-listen, rewatch the comments and just the depth of engagement and the energy in the room. So for those of you who are watching or listening along with us here in the podcast, I know that it's a long hour and a half, but thanks for hanging in with us. We're just going to say a couple words to kind of overview and leave you with some thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. But you know, one of the things that stood out to me that all three speakers said, and frankly, almost every speaker at the whole weekend of the conference said in some ways, But Dr. Ravitsky said it in her very opening lines, which is that the challenges of AI, or the challenges that AI is raising, are existential. They're not instrumental or pragmatic or even technical. And so much of the discourse that we hear in the media and in the news is about the technology and about the data centers. And I can't even remember how many trillions of dollars are being invested in AI in the tech industry in 2026, right? Like the focus is all there. But each of these speakers coming from different traditions are bringing it back to existential questions, or we could say anthropological questions, which is to say, anthropology are questions about the nature of what it means to be a human. Who are we? And Professor Yang, in her response, essentially kind of said the same thing. The core question is about who we are and what distinguishes us as humans from a highly advanced problem-solving algorithmic large language model, LLM. And, on the face of it, I think we all are like, well, obviously there's a difference between you and I and everybody else on this planet as in flesh human beings and a generative AI. But when you get into trying to define what that is, it's not as easy as it seems. And that's part of why this is, I think, an existential moment for us. And then, at one point, Monsignor Pegoraro quotes Dr. Eric Topol, who's very prolific writer, cardiologist on science and technology. But apparently he has a comment where he says, like the human person is going to be digitized and then AI is going to help us find healing and cure for disease through that. But Monsignor Pegoraro is pretty clear that in saying, the human person cannot be digitized. We are distinct from digital information. Parts of us can be maybe reflected or captured in digital information, but it doesn't capture the essence of who we are. So a final thought that Professor Yang kind of ended with is that, if we think of medicine as both technology and care, that's always going to involve a relational intelligence that, again, AI can mimic or rehearse or practice or look very real, but doesn't have that actual relational embodied connection. And that those questions are distinct from questions of efficiency and problem-solving optimization. So I'm left with, I guess, the broad need for the humanities, even in the most advanced technology that the human community has come up with so far. So those were kind of my thoughts to wrap things up. What about you, Dan? What did you take away?
Thanks for those, Tom. Really interesting insights, on the keynote address and the reflections. As I think about these talks, I'm reminded of Monsignor Pegoraro's international perspective, essentially, that he wants to think about this globally. We tend to think about this in the American context, which is important. We need to do that. He broadens. I think certainly that address broadens the aperture of our kind of insight and the scope of who we're looking at as we think about these things. And he's really looking to build global consensus. In some conversations that I had with him, that was important to him. And I think that really does reflect, Pope Francis and now Pope Leo. They're both looking to build consensus on norms and principles regarding AI in general, but also in healthcare. And I think one of the insights that the Monsignor has that I think is important is that ethical norms are key when legal regulations are lagging. They're always important, but when the regulatory framework, whether it's nationally or globally, is pretty impoverished, ethics here can lead the way. And the legal regulations should account for and reflect in many ways the ethical insights that are being generated in conferences like this, the good work of Monsignor Pegoraro at the Pontifical Academy for Life and elsewhere. Ethics doesn't substitute for legal regulations, but it's necessary for good regulations.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think Dr. Vardit Ravitsky really emphasized is that we can agree on these principles and norms. We can agree on what ought to be done and ought not be done, even if we disagree on the theoretical frameworks that inform our perspectives. It seems that history has borne this out, whether it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
we could go down the line of a lot of international agreements. We can come to agreement. We can come to agreement. And I think Professor Yang, one of the things that she said that really stuck with me is that it's a question about who we are and who we should become. She really invites us to ask that question of moral character. And I think that's an incredibly important question, one that we in the Catholic moral tradition are well positioned to ask as we look at, you look at the scripture, and scripture is about who we become. And the great theologians of the tradition, whether it's Augustine or Aquinas, and the good work of theologians, for hundreds of years, asking questions of character and virtue. Who are we? Who should we become? And what does it mean to provide care and healing in the healing ministry of Jesus Christ? Who are we called to become? So all of these comments and this whole session left me with a lot of hope for the direction that we're going in. It can be daunting. It can be a little, as Pope Francis said, it's AI is a fearsome tool. But it's also it's a tool that can engender a lot of hope about where we're going. And these three speakers and the conversation they had really left me with hope in the end.
Yeah, same here. And I think at the very end of Monsignor Pegораro's comments, he said something about how, Catholic institutions can sort of just practice what we believe and hold that out and allow that to sort of inform, moral and legal parameters and perspectives as they develop. And I think for those listening who work and maybe even work in the tech side of Catholic healthcare or the mission integration side, I think that's where we focus, right? There's a lot to be concerned about, and we need to name those things. But ultimately, I think that's where we can lead forward, developing tools that truly serve the poor and the vulnerable and expand access and things like that. So, yeah, the institutional side of that, of the living virtues. I know you're a fan of that, Dan, based on some of your research. Yeah, so thank you all for listening and for being with us. For Dan Daly, I'm Tom Bushlack. This has been Ethics on Call. You can find our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and our website, which is theologyandethics.org/podcast. When you're listening on one of those platforms, we really appreciate if you can follow us or subscribe, as well as leave us a review, preferably 5 stars, and feedback and comments about the show. All of that helps to build the algorithm, speaking of AI, so that more and more people could find the good work of what we're doing and people are highlighting in our podcast. Feel free to drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you soon, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, everybody.